Well, hello again, everybody, and today we will be talking about how to write the methods section of an APA style paper. And the methods section comes after the introduction and describes the methods that we used to do the study. So the methods section's goal is to provide the reader with information about how the study was conducted. I think of it kind of like a recipe. Maybe most of you have followed a recipe for cooking at some point, and it tells you exactly the ingredients and the amount of the ingredients that you need and exactly what you need to do in what order to get the final product. If you're baking a cake or making some kind of dinner, whatever it is, you have all the ingredients, all the steps, and then if you follow that, you should get that same result. That's the same with a methods section. The objective is to provide enough detail so that other people can duplicate the method. Remember, we always talk about the weight of the evidence, that one study doesn't prove anything. We need multiple people conducting the same or similar study. And so we have to give other researchers enough information, not only so they understand what you did, but you're really thinking about it. If someone was trying to replicate the study, would they have enough information so that another scientist could replicate or repeat exactly what you did using equivalent subjects and identical procedures? And that's important. So when we talk about equivalent subjects or equivalent participants, what we mean is people who are similar to the people who were in your particular study. So in your method section, you wouldn't provide their names and addresses and social security numbers and emails of people who were in your study so that other researchers would go find those exact same people. But you would provide enough information about their gender, their age, their socioeconomic status, maybe their IQ, depending on what the study is, so that another researcher could find equivalent participants. And identical procedures, meaning they do want to be able to follow exactly what you did using equivalent participants. This is the only section of an APA style paper that is divided into subsections. So we have the main heading of method, and then we have subsections of participants, design and procedure, and materials. So let's talk about the participants section. And this is where you report who your participants were, how many people were in your sample, any major demographic data like proportion of males and females, average age. And so again, we're describing in enough detail. So if someone, number one, understands when they're reading the paper who you did this research study with, who were your participants, and if they were going to replicate the study, they would have enough information to be able to find equivalent subjects. So we always have how many. That's important, right? Did you do your study on 10 participants or did you have 1,000 participants? Age, average age. So we usually have a mean and a standard deviation of the age of our participants. Gender, number of males, number of females, and then other relevant characteristics for your particular research study. So depending on what you're studying, there may be other demographic characteristics that are important. I do research on neuropsychological research on children, and so there are some important things that we like to describe in terms of our sample, in terms of number one, average IQ. So we give everyone an IQ test and we know kind of what their IQ is when we're studying their cognitive functioning. We also we want to know right or left-handed. Whether a participant is right or left-handed has something to do about the way the brain is organized, and because we're doing neuropsychological research, that's an important characteristic that we need to report. Socioeconomic status, that's another important factor when we're looking at cognitive functioning or academic achievement. And so we always have that. Other medical characteristics that we may want to represent as well. Ethnicity could be important. Maybe you're doing a study on political opinions or I don't know, political opinions. And so maybe you're interested in, I don't know, what kinds of demographic information might be important to understanding people's political opinions. Birth order, we think birth order is really important when we talk about development of personality. So birth order, are you the firstborn in your family, secondborn, thirdborn, might be important in a study on personality, wouldn't really be important in a neuropsychological study. So any demographic characteristics that are relevant to your research study. We also, in participants, talk about the selection process. Did you use a random sample, or how did you get your participants? Did you have advertisements on TV, advertisements on the internet? You've probably seen commercials that say, we're doing a research study. If you're interested, please call this number. So you have to talk about your selection process. For my research, we often put up flyers. Where are children? So things like at parks and libraries, pediatricians' offices. And so we write that in the methods section, how we obtain the sample. One type of sample that is a commonly used sampling technique is called a convenience sample. And we'll be talking more about this in the class, but a convenience sample is basically just sampling people who are convenient to you. People who are your friends and family, if we are doing an email survey, people whose emails you have. And for our studies in Psych 301, we're always using a convenience sample. We're not going to have to go around and recruit people from the rest of the city. So you'll be writing that you used a convenience sample. We also talk about proportion of dropout, meaning how many people started in the study and how many dropped out. This is important if you're doing a study that goes over a period of time. If it's over a week or over 6 months or something like that, you would maybe say we had 100 people start the study and 5% dropped out. It's not really an issue if it's a one-time study because there's no dropout. They either did it or they didn't do it. But that would go in your methods section. Here's a sample participant section just to give you an idea. All 250 students at a local middle school were recruited through letters mailed to their parents. Attached to the letters were informed consent forms for parents to sign if they agreed to allow their children to participate. Of the 250 parents, 120 returned the consent forms. That's a 48% response rate, which resulted in a convenience sample of 120 adolescents, 12 to 16 years old, with a mean age of 14.55. I'd also put a standard deviation there, who participated in the study. There were 70 males and 50 females. So you see you're understanding how parents were recruited, how many responded, and then a general idea of the participants. You'd probably add a little bit more, but this is an idea of how you would write our participants section. Again, beyond those age, number of participants, gender, it's a judgment call in terms of what another scientist would need to know about the participants if they were trying to replicate your study. So were they all university students? That might be important. If they were all university students, you wouldn't need to say all university and students enrolled in, let's say, Dr. Spilkin's class. You wouldn't need to say that because Dr. Spilkin doesn't mean anything to anybody else, right? You might, if they all happen to be research methods students, then you might say participants were all students in an undergraduate research methods class, that might be important, but you wouldn't put the number of the class because, again, the number of the class, if it's Psych 301 or Psych 260 or Psych 495, I mean, different universities use different numbers, so putting that number in your participant section wouldn't matter, but a description, an undergraduate research methods class, would be important. Design and procedure, these are this is the next subsection. This is the step-by-step details for how the study was conducted, where the study took place, the setting of the study, any situation the participants were exposed to, instructions that were given to the participants, word for word. We often write out exactly what you said to your participants, how long the experiment took, how the variables were measured. We're going to not worry about randomization or counterbalancing, but again, enough detail to replicate the study. So where was the study done? The study was done in a classroom setting or in a large lecture hall in a classroom campus or in a small individual room, or was done at the participant's home on a computer. Again, you're describing the study. Would you need to say, assuming you're doing a study on a college campus, you wouldn't say, this study was done in Smith Hall room 410. Nobody would know. Imagine people are reading this who live in other parts of the country, who live in other parts of the world. They wouldn't know where Smith Hall is and room 410 looks like. So you're describing the room, as a large lecture hall with many windows, or a well-lit classroom, or a somewhat darkened, a theater room, something like that. You're describing the room so that, again, someone could replicate the procedure, but you don't need to give the details that would really be meaningless to someone reading this article, again, in another part of the country or another part of the world. So all the details, this again is like the recipe, exactly what you said to the participants, how long did the experiment last, how did you operationalize and measure the variables, and enough detail so someone else could do exactly what you did. I will say that if you're, let's see here, actually we'll go to the next section, or the next slide. So you'll include any and all information that's relevant for replicating the study. And as I said, you wouldn't have to give the exact location of a classroom on campus, but any important factors might have influenced the results. Was it really loud in that classroom when you were doing the study? Was it very hot in the classroom? Important information like that you would want to add. Also, you want to describe the treatment of the participants, not the intent of the investigator. This is a small difference, and this is, again, with research writing, it's these small differences that are important to keep in mind. So it would be incorrect to say participants believed their results would be anonymous, because truly you don't know what the participants believed, right? All you can say is what you did. So you could say the experimenter told participants not to put their names on the survey and assured them anonymity, right? We can say that because that's what we did. Now, we don't know if participants believed their results would be anonymous or not, so that's just a small difference in writing style in terms of the method section. You're reporting what you did, okay, through the whole section. You might, in some cases, again, if you go on and do further research, you might have an apparatus section. We won't use it for this class, and you won't need it in any of your papers for me, but this would describe specific equipment that was used that's very technological types of equipment. So if you were using an MRI machine and doing an MRI study, then you would want to report all the details of that machine. This was a 1.5 Tesla GE MRI machine, and you would give all the details there. In this study, or in this class, we're certainly not using any fancy equipment, so we won't have an apparatus section. We will often have a materials section, and this describes any testing materials that were created for the study. So if you create a questionnaire, if you create a survey, you're going to describe it, and then you're going to also include a copy of whatever you created at the very end of your paper in something called an appendix. Or maybe you're doing a memory test and you've created a list of words or a list of pictures that you're wanting your participants to remember. So in your materials section, you describe what you created, and then you include whatever you created in the appendix. Because since you've created it, if someone wants to replicate the study, they need to be able to have access to whatever it is you've created. So that's why you put a copy of it in the appendix. Now, if you use a material that you did not create, then you just describe it. So very often we use psychological tests that are already created and published and sold, like an IQ test, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children, or a measure of executive functioning, the DCAFS, the Dallas Kaplan Executive Functioning System. Those are tests that are published and you can purchase, and so you would just describe. We use the WISC, and then you put the reference, and so people, if they want to use it, they could purchase it themselves. Or if you're using, again, something that someone else could find, maybe you used the front page of the Union Tribune newspaper for, I don't know, December 1st, 2000. I don't know, you had people read articles and then you were doing a memory test about what they read. So then you could just write that down and someone would be able to find that front page, however they would find that, and they could get that same information and that same material that you used. Either way, you're going to describe it, and then if you've created it, you'll include it in an appendix. We'll talk about how you describe the materials that you use. You need to give enough information so people understand what you're talking about. And so something like this, you can see the difference. Attitude was measured with a 9-item questionnaire. It didn't give you a lot of information, but your material section might look something like this. Attitude towards school was measured with a 9-item questionnaire developed for use in this study. The first 3 items measured attitudes toward academic subjects. The next 3 measured attitudes towards teachers, counselors, and administrators. And the last 3 measured attitudes towards school, social environment in the school. Participants were asked to rate each statement on a 5-point scale from strongly disagree, which was a 1, to strongly agree, which is a 5. The questionnaire is shown in Appendix A. So you see how it gives you enough information that you pretty much understand what the general idea of the questionnaire is. And then if you really are going to be interested in replicating the study or want more detail, you would go to the appendix to see the actual questionnaire. And you can see how this one sentence really doesn't give us enough information. All right, and that's the end of methods. Thank you.